Go a little bit background into the science policy group at Berkeley. Plug our group a bit, try to get you all to join, or at least get on the listserv if you're not already. And then we'll have our two speakers come up and give a little bit of background about themselves and their work, and specifically how GMOs may play a role in their work, or how they think about GMOs within their work. And then throughout the entire talk, or throughout the entire discussion, I will be moderating and asking some questions, but also some people have already asked about the length of the event. The length of the event and the discussion will be dependent upon your questions as well. So we have a Slido in which you can ask questions in real time. And I will say this probably 4 or 5 times. The code is Berkeley's-GMOs, or Berkeley-GMOs. Caps. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the science policy group at Berkeley. So we are a group of primarily graduate students from a diverse group of scientific fields, and we're interested such as this event are revolved around having speakers come in and talk about their work, especially things that are policy relevant. So specifically, I'll be moderating a discussion on GMOs tonight. I am a physical chemist, so this is completely out of my field, but in order to be engaged scientists, we have to have interests besides the small details of our field. So this Science Meets Science series is sponsored by Research America. And so we've had 3 forums. The first one was in November and it was regarding wildfires. Tonight's is about GMOs. And so it's a combination of a public forum, which is this evening, and then a policy roundtable, so a writing workshop, which is going to take place next Thursday from 5:30 to 7:30 in 375 LeConte Hall. And so in that policy roundtable, as students will have the opportunity to think about the best way to talk about GMOs to a potential legislator. And so we'll be writing one-pagers and understanding the best way to do that. Erin, stay a little bit further. There we go. Okay. And then also the upcoming forum is about artificial intelligence, which will be in early March. So tonight, we welcome Dr. Sarah Hake and Dr. David Zilberman. And Dr. Sarah Hake, she is the Center Director of the USDA Plant Gene Expression Center, and she's an associate professor here at Berkeley. And Professor Zilberman is a professor at agriculture and resource economics. So in a short moment, I'll ask you both to come up and give about a 5 to 10 minute introduction to your background, your current work, previous work you've done, and specifically start to talk about how that can relate to GMOs. And then, as I mentioned, you can go to Slido, and this is the code that will allow you to join. And so please, if you have questions for the presenters, I will be on my laptop up here. Not being rude, I'm just monitoring your questions. So please submit them at any time. I will try to incorporate them as the discussion continues. And finally, so like I said, there's Science Policy Group. We have numerous different activities. We encourage you all to join. We have a growing social media presence, so you can follow us on Twitter. I recently obtained access to the Twitter account, so if you ever see any mistakes, it's probably me, because I'm not really a Twitter person. And feel free to tweet about tonight's event, take pictures, and post about it. And if you're interested in science policy in general, our Twitter channel follows a lot of relevant organizations in the area and both nationally. So it's a good opportunity to interact with numerous organizations and students from across the country. Okay, so with that, I think I'll invite up our speakers. like I said, if you could give a 5 to 10 minute introduction, maybe some background about, I know a lot of our students are interested in how career tracks and how you decide on your career track, but then also specifically GMO related work. I think you have to turn on your mics as well. Maybe not.
Okay, so my name is Zilberman. I'll tell you, I grew up in Israel when I was an undergraduate student because of my background, my parents couldn't. I need to pay for myself. I was working as a computer programmer full time, and that's probably the best thing that happened to me because I really learned how to analyze systems and how to work with clients and to ask questions. That's what I'm doing till this day. And I wrote some payroll system, and I decided that I didn't really want to be in business because you have to work too hard. So I came and I applied to a PhD. I was a good student, and I selected Berkeley for obvious reasons. You really have to be stupid not to come to Berkeley. If you want to come to a PhD, you have excellence and weather, and it was fun there, and I think it's fun now. Anyhow, and I moved to agricultural economics. I have some background in agriculture, and there were several friends of mine said that it's a really fantastic department at Berkeley, and you can go from there to every place. And so my initial work was on animal waste. Now, I think it is really important because no one thinks that animal waste is an exciting topic. Basically, and I realized, God, if I was the only one that I knew was working on animal waste, so I said, what we can learn about animal waste, about policy, and I developed a theory and I started publishing about it. And I realized that the key element is that if you look at any topic that you are working with and you understand the detail, it will be interesting. It doesn't need to be like something that is the biggest problem of the world. Actually, animal waste is a huge problem. Environmentally, it was probably the biggest problem in the 20th century. But once you understand, once you really are deep into something, you really can learn a lot. You can get a lot of insight about it. And from animal waste, so I wrote some paper about animal waste. I was lucky I got a job here. And then I moved from one topic to another. So I started working on the economic of irrigation. And again, I developed models basically speaking with people about the challenges rather than looking at data and running regressions. And from there, I started working on pesticide. And I really developed a theory how to estimate the productivity of pesticide. And when GMO became important, people said, "Guys, can you help us to study GMO?" And then I start really understanding what GMO is all about. And for me, it was great because what I learned over the year is that as an economist, you need to know a little bit of science. You see, I don't take the economics per se that seriously. Of course, take it seriously. But economics without science is like a car without an engine, especially if you're in this area. So you understand what's going on with the GMO, what basically GMO is all about. And I started looking at the estimating of the productivity of GMO, and then I really started looking at all the policy aspects. So the last 10 years I worked on, 20 years I worked on almost every aspect, and it really helped to shape my view about a lot of things. Now, I have some background working on climate change. I was responsible on a task force in the White House for the White House on climate change during Clinton. So I realized that GMO is not only, that science is not only important for its own sake or not to grow tomatoes better, but it's really important on bigger problem. It's important on something like the bioeconomy. I'll give you about 5 or 6 minutes on my GMO ideas and the bioeconomy and why my feeling is that if society, for whatever reason, give up on GMO and CRISPR like they want to do in Europe, then they should also give up on climate change. And I really think that sometimes the people that with the best intention really can lead you to hell. And I think a lot of time are people like Greenpeace, fantastic group, but they are totally misguided when it comes to GMO. Let me explain you why. My feeling is, and Sarah knows much more than me, my knowledge is biology, maybe 0.5, not 1 even. But for economists, if you have, but that's much bigger than most economists, if I know. But for sure, most policymakers. So if you know a little bit, sometimes it can help because it's an issue of a principle. So the basic idea about GMO is that GMO is an approach on CRISPR to try to develop new varieties and to develop new crops and to develop new medicine that is based on basic understanding of the internal mechanism within the organism. What do I mean? When you look at physics, people mostly relied on mechanics to do everything. Till someone discovered electricity and the atom, and suddenly we are working with cell phones and a lot of even smaller saying nanotechnology that is based on understanding what's going on inside the electricity or inside the organism, inside the atom. The same thing is GMO. It's basically based on manipulating internal processing within cells, within molecules, etc. So the key point is that it allows you incredible precision. Now, most of the methods that we use for plant breeding were very imprecise. None of the crops that we have are natural. The notion of natural is unnatural. It's an invention. Most of the things that we have are man-made. We are in a room, we are not in a cave. You are all dressed things that humans produce. You're not really going naked or taking some skin for animal. So the interaction that we are doing to nature by building are much bigger than by modifying crops. So to some extent, the big challenge of GMO or CRISPR is gene editing. It's even more precise than GMO. The big challenge is to understand what are the properties and the implications of different genes, and to modify them to improve performance. Now, what happened is that for whatever reasons, people start opposing it. And how you oppose it? You oppose it by having a regulatory process that only billionaires can afford it, or that the cost of introducing new variety is so high that you can introduce it maybe in 2 or 3 major crop like corn and soybean, and only big companies can do it. So if you have a professor in Berkeley that discover a new trait and discover a new way to produce a variety, they cannot start a company because it will cost a lot, cost hundreds of millions tens of millions of dollars to develop a new trait. So the power goes to the Monsanto of the world. So Greenpeace and all the environmentalists, and I consider myself an environmentalist for a lot of time, basically push for a regulatory process that help the big company to become bigger. So that is one thing. So you really have a regulatory process that is really expensive, and it's not that you don't, of course you need regulation, but you can do it in a way that will be cheap. So you can have genetic new varieties that can improve the yield in not only in corn and soybean, but in cassava and tomato and bell pepper, etc. Now, the other thing is a little bit about my research. So the key question that I try to understand is what has been the implication of GMO up to now? Now, a lot of people that speak about GMO are people that come from the humanities. And I love the humanities and I read a lot of books like anyone else. And my feeling is that if you're in environmental science and you don't take chemistry, and what you take some classes like Silent Spring. Now, Silent Spring to me is like the Bible. Extremely well-written literature, but totally irrelevant about a lot of things. Things change. You know, chemical companies are not all the time, they are under regulation, the environmental quality improved. So to some extent, when we have something like climate change, if you don't use the best science, you are in trouble. So now let's go and see what do we know about GMO up to now. The first thing that we know, that we have applied GMO only on about, I don't know, 5 or 6 major corn, soybean, etc. What they have done, and they have not used all over the world, on average, they increase yield by 5 to 15 or 20%. In developing countries, the impact is much bigger. GMO is much more effective in developing countries than in the US, for example. In cotton, it increased yield in India by 25 to 30%, in the US by 5%. In the US, it replaced chemicals with GMO. So to some extent, by increasing yields, you can do 2 things. First, you can use less land to produce the same amount. You have less greenhouse gases, so it's good for the environment. And you reduce the price of food. Now people say, gosh, but why do we care? Corn, people don't eat corn. Corn goes to cows. People eat cows. And people eat cows and chicken and other things. Basically, if you look at all the proteins that we eat, chicken is basically a processed corn and soybean. The fact that we reduce the price of corn and soybean by 15 or 20% means that people in developing countries, in Thailand and in Uganda, can eat chicken. Otherwise, the price goes up. It wouldn't affect us, but it will affect people in developing countries. It reduces, we calculated that even now, with all the limitations, GMO reduce the greenhouse gases of agriculture by an amount that is equivalent to about 1/6 of the amount that is emitted by cars in the United States. It reduces pesticide use. And you have to recognize that this is the beginning. It's really, there are hundreds of applications, and we actually use about 10 of them. So there was a generation of researchers like Sarah and others that developed new varieties, and they couldn't develop it because of regulation. But the big crime to me is what happened in developing countries. In the US, we can eat organic, we have a lot of land relatively, very smart farmers, and not many people. But in developing countries, they couldn't survive without increased productivity. And when you don't increase productivity, you have high deforestation. So to me, if you really care about deforestation, care about greenhouse gases, you need it. Now, the other thing is this. How do you think we will deal with carbon? At the end, I think there will have some biological solutions, some bacteria that digest carbon or something like this, and it will be some sort of GMO. Without understanding biology, we won't solve climate change. The point is everyone thinks that they care about climate change, but in reality, everyone cares more about what they have to do immediately rather than 50 years down the line. So unless you really use all the tools that science has, we are in trouble. That's the reason that I think that we really need to have a policy in the US and around the world to take advantage of this new technology to support science. Of course, we have to have regulatory process, but a regulatory process that allow us to take advantage of the technology rather than regulate it in order that some people will make money for selling organic, which I found a great product to sell, but something that is actually not good to the environment, or the wheat farmer will get higher price that they get. Thanks.
Okay, so I was born in Iowa, and I went to college in Iowa, Cornell College, and then graduate school in St. Louis at Washington University, and came here to do a postdoc, and managed to land a job here, which was really a great thing. Because at that time, we moved onto a farm when we moved to California, where I still am. It's a Gospel Flat Farm, if you ever go to Bolinas, on the way into town. And so this whole discussion of GMOs has always been interesting to me because I'm married to an organic farmer, and I live on a farm, and my son's an organic farmer. And I'm a GMO person. And so when there was a vote in Marin County to ban GMOs, and a couple people said, I'm really against GMOs, but can you still do your research? And they were really concerned about me as a person, that my research would be impacted because they knew me and they trusted me to a certain degree. And I would write things in the Hearsay News and they'd read them. So I had this little chance to educate people a tiny bit. And another example is people would all knew I worked on corn, so I'm a corn geneticist, and they see me walking down the street and they'd say, "Do you still work on corn?" And I said, "Yeah, did you just read Michael Pollan's book?" And they go, "Yeah, how do you know?" And said I had that same feeling of he sort of disparages corn. And actually, corn is an amazing plant because, and African countries are wanting to grow up more and more because it's so easy. You can eat it when it's young, you can eat it when it's old, you can dry it. You know, it is an amazing plant. And so I think it's unfair to disparage corn. But I also taught a seminar with the P&B department on GMOs, and we wanted to get at the heart of why the people are upset about it, and maybe there's some people who are still in that. And we looked at lots of different issues, and in the end, it really was the big companies, just as you were talking about, that they hold a lot of the power, and they're the ones that were able to regulate products, and so it looks as if GMOs are in the hands of big business. And you know, when it comes to your food, you don't want big business in charge. It's good when it's your cell phone and big business is in charge of your cell phone, but everybody feels like they want to be a little more connected to their food. So I think that's that disconnect. But I've always enjoyed this conversation, and I volunteered to talk to lots of different audiences about it because I think if you understand what genetic engineering is, you'll see it's a useful tool. And it's just like the computer is useful for everybody, and maybe bad people have used computers too. So, you know, you just need to know what it is, and you need to think, is this in the public good? Who's benefiting? What are the risks? And then you can see that it is a possible tool. And one example that I don't think would make sense was genetically engineered lettuce. You know, it's like lettuce is such a fast-growing plant. I mean, just plant some new varieties or change your variety, but potatoes. So on our farm, we grow potatoes, but we can never grow them in the same plot because they quickly get a disease, and the tomatoes also in that same spot. So there are potato diseases that are really hard to get around, and I wish there was a GE potato solution for organic farmers. And this is another point that I've had conversations with Pam Ronald, who's at UC Davis. Her husband is also a is also an organic farmer. And she wrote a beautiful book called Tomorrow's Table. That's what it's called. And we wrote a letter together saying there should be 3 ways to have the food groups. So there could be conventional, and there could be sustainably grown but genetically engineered, and then there could be traditional organic. So right now, you know, there's only 2 types. You can spray the bejesus out of it with pesticides, but it's okay. It's not GMO. So, you know, you don't really get this nice choice of what the implements are. And another point that David made was crops aren't natural, and so corn, it came from teosinte, this wild plant where if you tried to eat one of those seeds, it would crack your teeth. And so ancient farmers developed this as a plant, or wheat, which is a cross from 2 different species, you know, goat grass and were crossed together by an accident, and that made wheat. And everywhere you look, crops are not, they didn't just sort of arrive naturally. Probably mushrooms, if you go mushrooming, that would probably not be something that's been bred. But in general, food isn't natural, and it takes humans to protect it and take care of it. If you have a garden, you know, if you don't weed your garden, it's a mess. So the other point about crops is you constantly need to be fighting pathogens. And this is the one use of GMOs that I think across the board that I feel very strongly supportive of. And I'll give one example, and that's papaya. So papaya was being devastated by the ring spot virus, and scientists who were ARS, USDA, and Cornell got together, and they put a piece of that virus into the papaya, kind of like a vaccine, and it makes that papaya resistant to the virus. And now papaya is grown, and it's virus-free, and it's genetically engineered, and it's not regulated, so you don't actually know you're eating genetically engineered papaya because they decided this is safe. And it took a long time to figure that out. So anytime when you can use genetic engineering to protect a plant, you're reducing pesticides, and that's what he's spent his career in documenting the savings to to the environment and farmer yields. So I hope the questions come up about concerns or how to educate people. And if you want more details about genetic engineering, like what actually is it, just ask.
Okay, so that's a good segue actually, because we have a couple questions about the origins of the term GMO and what it actually means. So I have two kind of related questions. Let me find them here. So what do you think the right definition of GMO should be? Or, in some senses that might be this is what it's defined as from a scientific perspective, but then also who gets to set the policy that dictates what that is?
Can I take that one?
You're both welcome to answer
Well,
as many
I'll start,
questions.
then you can answer. Okay, so Pam Ronald in her book says it really should be genetic engineering, because genetically modified would be anything that has been bred or crossed, or so it might be better to call it genetic engineering, because that really implies that a human had some part of it and it wasn't just a matter of crossing. Because if you cross two things together, it's not a GMO. So I like genetic engineering, and I think that is when, and it used to be that you inserted a piece of DNA in it, and the way you inserted that DNA in was a trick of this bacteria that infects plants. And Pat Zabriskie was in on those early discoveries where if the bacteria can put DNA into a plant, why can't we use some of those vehicles and get our own DNA into the plant? And so that's where it came, and it really was the insertion of DNA. And it might have not been foreign DNA, it might have even been corn DNA into a corn plant, but it required a step in the laboratory. Now CRISPR is different in that there isn't insertion of DNA. It can be just that this RNA goes in and it recognizes the target, a little clip is made, and it goes away, the RNA is degraded, and then you have it genetically, it's now been genetically engineered, but there's no trace of the touching of the human. And it wouldn't be any different than had you treated those seeds with EMS, which is a mutagen. It's perfectly okay by the regulations to treat seed with EMS and then screen for mutations. The trouble with screening, having treated seeds with a mutagen is that there's thousands of mutations. So you might have the one you want, but you've got another 999 you don't want, and you have to cross them away. So David mentioned CRISPR a few times, and it's going to be really interesting to see. The USDA, I believe in the US, is saying this isn't genetically modified because there isn't any trace. You could never tell by sequencing it that anything happened separate from something that could have been natural.
So the point, I think generally speaking, these are really arbitrary definitions. Almost everything that we use, the word genetic is genetically modified. Now, the thing is, there are many types of things that are genetically modified. You can have, so I like to, when it comes to GMO, I like the term transgenic, because we move gene from one plant to another. CRISPR is another, and there will be many, many other technologies. So to some extent, there are a lot of technologies, and what really matters to me is not so much the technology, it's the final product. If the final product is something that is no different than any other product and doesn't have any negative side effect, why should I care about what type of technology it is? And all the time, technology are really changing. Now, when the original GMO started, they used something called agrobacteria or agar, and it was very, very artificial. CRISPR is a little bit more precise, and later on they would come with new methods. Now, who should regulate it? I think this is quite a challenge. I think there are 2 or 3 key parameters of regulation. First, you have an element of truth in advertisement. It's like medicine. It has to be effective. It has to do what it's supposed to do. Secondly, you have to look at the environmental implication. So you need to have 2 types of regulation. Regulation on efficacy and regulation of environmental side effects. Then you have the issues that relate to issue of market, antitrust, monopoly, and all this other stuff. So to some extent, we have really mechanism to deal with it, but always when we look at regulation in society, obviously people worry that big company will have impact, etc. But my feeling is that a lot of time the resistance for GMO is not so much from consumer concern, but also because of commercial concern, and maybe later when I can speak about it. A lot of time, companies, chemical companies in Europe that were losing market was the people that were the most anti-GMO in the beginning. Bayer, that now bought Monsanto, made testimonies against GMO in the National Academy of Science, the forum that I was involved with, saying that GMO had no chance and it's expensive and not very efficient because they didn't want to lose market share. But to some extent, it's a technology that, like any other technology, may have side effects and you always need to regulate it. But I think that the two key aspects is the environmental aspect, the environmental health aspect, and the efficacy. And every time they change the regulation, but it has to be done in a way that is scientific, science-based, and recognize that if the regulation is too expensive, the people that lose from it are the public and mostly the poor. Expensive technology can always approach the rich. People in Africa have cell phone because it's cheap. So if we over-regulate it, I don't think that we save the environment, but we basically kill the poor.
Okay, so we have a lot of questions about policy and how these things are regulated. So if we could go back a moment, I think both of you mentioned how, and you were just talking about this, how it's really difficult to make them outside of a big, massive, wealthy business. So do you foresee methodologies in which they do become more accessible, and what are those paths such that it's not just these massive?
Well, if CRISPR becomes accepted, and I thought maybe somebody could talk about it in the audience, but I thought the USDA was going to allow CRISPR in the US, then it's very likely that it will happen on a much broader scale.
So, but getting back to, like, we are a developed country, so how do we think about some of the places that he's talking about? And, another person asked a good question, is this even a conversation that's happening in developing countries, or is it just in the developed world?
My feeling is this, I work a lot in developing countries. GMO, you can introduce GMO in developing countries. The basic thing is this, people really look, there are a lot of illusions about developing countries. People really romanticize what's called smallholder. I love this term. I don't know how many of you have been in developing countries. Smallholder is very, very nice term, except if you are the smallholder. You have life expectancy of 50 years, you're really poor. So to some extent, almost in all the countries, you have the same process you have in America. People move to the cities. You may move from 1 acre to 5 acres. And people use cell phone, people use car. So the same thing that you have here, you can have them. For example, people in Uganda, which is not the most developed country, developed a banana that with GMO that can solve a very important, severe disease that affects the banana. So banana in Uganda is the main food. Yield went down by 40%. There is a new varieties that can deal with it. They cannot introduce it because they're afraid of the EU. So to some extent, the main reason that big companies are doing it is because they have the advantage in terms of cost. But in a developing country, you can have big companies in developing countries. Not only there are big companies in developing countries that can do it. American international companies can have branches everywhere. If they can have cell phone and if they can have TV in developing countries, they can have GMO. So this is not an argument. Now, if you say that food is provided only by smallholders, how many companies in the US produce lettuce? Do you know? All of you eat lettuce. Very small companies. Have you heard about Taylor Brothers? They have about 40% of the lettuce. Two families, Taylor and Charles, dominate the lettuce market. most of us have cell phones, so to some extent, the fact that there are processors in the middle that have advantage, it's not that I advocate for it, but the reality is there is an economic of scale, and you can have you can grow it in developing countries. Today, they are afraid of Europe. They cannot get aid. Kenya would love to have GM corn. Uganda would like to have GM banana. South Africa grow GM corn. Philippines have GM corn. Nothing happens there. Actually, they don't suffer from aflatoxin. So it's not issue that suddenly the poor won't have it. If this argument would be right, then we shouldn't have also cell phone in developing countries.
So what do you see as pathways to potentially affect that regulation?
In my view,
Specifically with the EU.
is the EU. GMO is the EU. Because the EU, and what happened in the EU is that it's like in the US, when the US you have a small group of people that are against contraceptive or against birth control. So they didn't say, oh, don't use birth control in America because then no one will vote for it. But when Reagan became president, he decided that Reagan himself wasn't the most religious person in the world, he probably was the least religious. He decided that we don't transfer birth control to developing countries. Why? Because the religious right was happy. So what happened is that the environmental group a lot of times say that was really true. In France, they came to the prime minister at the time, Sarkozy, and say, okay, you have two options. Either we will be against nuclear power or we'll be against GMO. And I said, GMO? So see, it's mostly the European.
But it also seems that Europe is really taking the lead with climate change action. And if the voice like we need to explain to Greta that how this could be a really useful tool. So I mean, maybe Europe, I'm just throwing that out there, has the possibility to change its platform in terms of being so against it if they see how useful it is.
Do you know if GMOs are incorporated into any existing climate change plans like the Paris Accords or
I don't
anything
think
like
that they're, I don't think they are or aren't. It's just what we need we need genetic resiliency in our crops, and we need to have that so that we can breed for things that are changing. And so there are a lot of scientists who are working for more drought tolerant or more tolerant for higher CO2, where it can grow with less water. And there is a maize genetically engineered line out there that Monsanto developed where the plant gets by with less water. Under drought, they do better. So, so there are some things out there, and there's a lot of research going in this way.
I actually wrote a paper that the IPCC doesn't have GMO because of a lot of pressure.
But does it say no GMO? I mean,
they don't mention GMO because if you look at the reason IPCC, actually it's a little bit more complex. You have to recognize the European company bought Monsanto. Why did they buy Monsanto? They didn't buy Monsanto to lose money. They bought Monsanto because they realized that they got now GMO, if they have it, then they can continue the pest control business with GMO. Now what happened is that, so I really believe that in 10 or 15 years, Europe will change the line.
Just to clear, how long has Europe generally been anti-GMO?
From the beginning,
From
1996.
I mean, it seemed like it was a way to bolster their economics because if their markets were flooded with GMO soybean and corn, then their markets would lose out. So that's part of, probably 99%.
So do you, go ahead.
Except in 1996, if you look at what happened to GMO, till 1996 it will move it like this, then it stopped because Europe did it, and they realized it was an American technology, and it will really threaten some of the companies. And in the meantime, I think public and the way they do it is that they really try to prevent it from entering the stores. The moment it will be in the stores, it will change. Things will change.
Okay. Let me move on to Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, we both mentioned pesticides and resiliency. So there are a couple questions regarding this topic area. So if fighting pathogens is the greatest reason to use genetic engineering, do we expect to face the same antibiotic resistance issues in modern antibiotic drugs?
I think they're two different stories.
Okay.
I mean, certainly with BT, so the BT stands for Bacillus thuringiensis, and it is a bacteria. And as an organic farmer, you can spray that on your crop. So it's sort of allowed because it's natural. And then they take the gene out of BT, add the gene for toxin, which is very specific to insects, and that makes it transgenic, and it's BT. And it's true, it's been grown a lot, and then insects do become resistant to it. But to me, it seems really different than antibiotic resistance because you're not creating bacteria that are going to take over the world. It means that the crops are not as strong. The crops aren't going to take over the world if they're not taken care of. So I feel like those are two different stories that somehow got crossed.
My feeling is this. The reality is everything else. The point is this, people would like to have final solution. Final solution does. And we are in a world that things are, the evolution occurs. So the point is this, all of us will be unemployed if we will be in nirvana. The worst thing for all of us will be that we are in heaven and nothing is, will die out of boredom. So to some extent, the challenge of science is to deal with evolution. And I think the big issue with resistance of antibiotics is not so much that resistance occurs because it's expected, but that companies are not able and we don't invest in research and we understudy it. The reality is life expectancy is increasing. Of course there are risks and there will continue to be risks. But if we don't take advantage of the tool that we have, and we have climate change, then we will have war and we will kill one another. So my feeling is you have to look at it within a context.
So the alternative is just killing each other?
No, that is the alternative. Human basically, with all the problem, science is not that great, but the alternative is worse. And to me, this is a decade of biology. And this is a decade when we understand biological tools. And what really happened is it's not GMO CRISPR, is that for whatever reason, people have some romantic view and they want to stop it. Of course, there are limits about cloning, etc. But you cannot really destroy basic biological tools that will allow you to adapt to climate change. And you cannot, the key, what really is an assumption is we should in US and Europe, because we are civilized, we will be able to use this tool very well, but don't let it in developing countries.
I just want to add one more thing about what I mentioned an example for drought, but another example for resiliency. So something we're thinking about in our unit is trying to get woody plants to flower early, and that would be a transgenic plant, but if it flowers early, that it could then make crosses, because right now it takes so many years to breed for fruit trees and any kind of woody thing. So sort of tricking the plant to flowering early to get that cross and get that breeding. And I think that would be a nice tool for looking for resiliency, because we don't know whether we need to get things to flower as the days get shorter or longer or colder or hotter, but just to have that as a tool. And so that's a real example of some genetic engineering for resiliency.
So you mentioned this BT corn.
And there's BT everything.
Okay.
Yeah. BT.
But so essentially, you said it's put on the crops that
It's in the crop.
It is in
It's
the crops. Okay,
So it's
that
genetically
it
engineered.
generates some sort of natural pesticide.
In a way, so it's only has an effect if something eats it. So
Okay.
when an insect eats it, then they are basically paralyzed and they starve to death. So they kind of
Okay.
and they can't digest.
So are those crops regulated?
Yeah, and
Okay.
they've been in the fields for, it's probably, you would know the numbers, like 80%.
Yeah,
Of
this
fields.
is someone's question. They had 80% up there.
Yeah, and it's been the last 20 or 30 years.
So are there, are people interested in, or are there studies looking at how that is potentially harmful or positive for the overall ecosystem? So insects and their survival as well?
Well, it's a lot better than spraying the field.
That's fair.
I tell you, this, I've been in the environmental field for many years. If you are working at the EPA, you're a hero if you discover that something doesn't. The person that discovered that lead reduced children IQ, and that's the reason that we have unleaded gasoline, became a hero. So there are many people, I know about many people that work on the different side effects of PT or anything like this. And up to now, I don't know about any studies that show that there's a problem. I also wouldn't be surprised if once in a while you find that there is a problem. You have to look at the benefit cost analysis of everything. How many of you drink alcohol? Alcohol is a very dangerous thing and people are using it. So like people speak about Roundup. Roundup, in my view, has been probably the most effective herbicide ever. It may cause some problem. People are allergic to something. So to have something that is, there is nothing that is perfect. You really try to do things that are very good and generate much more good than risk. That's basically what you can do.
Okay, so let's talk, you mentioned a little bit about how, you said people make the argument that people don't really eat corn, but cows eat corn.
Yeah.
So we have a couple questions here about alternative meat and general meat related questions. So have people tried to at least theoretically predict how increase in GMOs could potentially change our meat production industry and those impacts on hopefully benefiting or mitigating climate change?
Well, certainly, for precision fermentation is genetic engineering. It's probably going to be in yeast, not in transgenic plants. But I'm really excited by that as a way to get land out of corn and soybean and open up that land for other uses, perhaps climate mitigation by genetic engineering yeast to produce protein. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it because there is a concept called input use efficiency. How much of the input is resulting in the output? Now, when you give cows some food, cow doesn't say, man, God, I eat in order for people who eat me. Cow really want to have fun in its life. And only part of the energy goes to food. So my feeling is that the land that we will need will be much smaller. But the technology, the guy that developed the impossible burgers, is a GMO guy. So to some extent, the reason I'm for GMO is because with modern biology, we will move away from eating animals, so we'll have more animals in the wilderness and we'll have less land, and we can do it. If we really use traditional methods, how can you do organic farming without manure? So to some extent, it's really a crucial mechanism to move toward a system that is more environmentally sound and more resilient. So artificial meat will require some sort of genetic manipulation.
Okay, so I'm just going to have a lot of questions now, so they might not necessarily be in any sort of order. So, okay, so if regulations are a drag on innovation in agriculture, why not eliminate all government oversight? Is there any good reason to put entrepreneurs?
Trump question.
You can abstain from answering if you'd like.
The thing is this, a lot of people say, okay, no, the logic for this is that people say, okay, companies don't want to lose clients, so they wouldn't do anything bad. But the reality is that people have limited resources, and if you can make money quick and can get away with it, you need to have government regulation, no doubt about it. The question is efficient regulation. Now, the one thing that people have to recognize that if you give, let's say in India, if you're an Indian company and you want to have a BT code, you pay, I don't know, about $500,000. If you are Monsanto, you pay $3 million. So there is a lot, so the regulation has to be done right, without corruption, with transparency, etc. But you cannot have a society without regulation.
So do you think this regulation should be, or as us as citizens influencing policy and ultimately perhaps regulation, do you think this is better done internationally or domestically, specifically in regard to GMOs?
Generally speaking, it has to be science-based, and that's very important.
And probably not European, I mean, not worldwide, because everything has to be somewhat local.
The point is, see what happened with Brexit. So you cannot, even in the US, we don't agree about anything. So practically.
But just an example of the absurdity of the regulations, I will have 20 genetically engineered corn plants at Oxford Tract with a fluorescent protein so I can follow the protein in the cell. And I have to do APHIS permits for that, and an inspector has to come inspect my field. And he flies up from Colorado, spends a couple nights in a hotel on your dime to inspect my 10 plants, because that's just the rules. They need to be inspected if you grow them. And so there also needs to be some common sense there. Like I can see inspecting a field of 5 acres, or couldn't I just send him a photograph? Something like that. So someone needs to be a little bit more think of the expense for the public as well.
Have you ever tried to introduce that common sense at any point?
I did when.
And how have you gone about that?
Yeah,
Thinking about kind of us as science
I haven't
advocates.
tried, because it's more than just talking to the inspectors. I probably need to go to some other level. I haven't. I just complain.
Okay. It's fine, understandable.
That's one of the things that you do as economists a lot of time is, I think the most effective thing is to write papers that shows the cost. Like we wrote a paper on golden rice. Basically shows that all the delay of introduction of golden rice cost, I don't know, about something, 700,000 outside. Now, these people are Indian, they're not European, but still, their eyes are eyes. So we wrote this paper, and it has huge impact. So generally, if you really show the cost, but you have to be very, very rigorous, because the moment that you make a little mistake, man, you're in trouble.
Does everybody know what golden rice is? No. It's engineered rice that has expresses, and I think Pat can jump in and help me, vitamin A, precursor to vitamin A for eyesight. And is there iron in that as well, in this construct? No, just the vitamin A. So that if you eat rice as your daily diet, it's like you're getting some vegetables. And people say, well, why don't they eat vegetables? And you're like, well, they can't afford vegetables if they don't have vegetables. So for a lot of people, just eating rice is their main food. And if the rice can deliver what they need for their eyes, then it's a huge deal. And this was developed by academics probably 15 years ago. And then Greenpeace and people like that have just delayed it. I think it's finally now coming on the market.
What do you say to people when you interact with them in Greenpeace
I don't know.
about GMOs?
My mother will introduce me as like, she works on Frankenfoods, want to meet her? So there's always an icebreaker. That was on a Sierra Club trip.
Okay.
It'd be like talking to anti-vacciners. Yeah.
See, like I said, and I agree with you about whaling, but we disagree about GMO. And the point is this, like, several people from the Environmental Defense Fund, when I wrote something that was basically saying, God, we need GMOs, they said, God, we really support you, but the key element is that environmentalism is a business. So basically, if you look at Greenpeace, they develop a position and they get a lot of donors, and that's their identity. And other environmental groups don't want to lose support, but they know that that some and that degree of GMO is really essential. There are a lot of other problems too.
Okay, how do you think, I'm gonna move on, completely different question here. How do you think intellectual property interacts with this debate?
It probably does.
Intellectual property is huge. Okay? So, okay, so when it starts, okay, if you look at the idea of transgenic, it started in medicine. And there's a patent called a Cohen-Boyer patent that allow you to do something similar to basically to move genes in medicine.
Is that for insulin?
Yes, but it's a process. It's like the agrobacteria only for medicine. Now, well, yes, okay, but it's functionally the same. It's similar. So the beginning, the key element, it allows you to produce artificial insulin and a lot of other products. But the key point is that the patent was held by UCSF and Stanford. And basically it was sold in a non-exclusive manner. So they can sell you the right for this patent to many companies. So that allowed this industry to be developed throughout the world by many companies using this patent, and the university made a lot of money, and Cohen and Boyer made a lot of money, and one of them started a company called Genentech. Now, what happened with GMO, there are two basic, or several fundamental patents, and they were all developed by the university, by University in St. Louis and by a guy in Berkeley, but they were held by Monsanto as exclusive right. And to me, that was a big mistake. That was a real big problem. But even with the exclusive right, people can buy the right to use the patent, and a lot of companies use the patent.
And patents last for 20 years, right?
Yes, patent 17 years, 17 or 20 years. But the key element, if you look at patents in TV or another thing, people swap patents. But intellectual property right was a problem. Now, me and two other guys started an organization called PIPRA that is in Davis that allows, that basically develop mechanisms that provide intellectual property right and everything to relate to it to people that develop new corporations in developing countries. So if you want to develop something in Africa where patent is not registered, you can use GMOs, no problem. So intellectual property right is a problem, but it's much less than regulation. Actually, one of the biggest mistakes that we did as analysts that we worry too much about intellectual property and not enough about regulation. And regulation is a killer.
And I wonder how they're going to regulate CRISPR when, is it knowing what that gene does, or is it CRISPRing that gene? You know, who gets to hold the patent on that, or the intellectual property?
But there is now what happens with CRISPR is that now everyone can use CRISPR for research, but using it commercially is a problem. Right. And this is, to me, the big issue, because when people will start to have applications of CRISPR, you will see a lot of fight. And I'm not sure that CRISPR is managed in the best way. But every time that you have a technology, it happens. But at the end, the people that own the patent want to make money, so they find a way to compromise. They don't think that intellectual property is a problem, but it's not as big as the regulation.
Okay. So I think, Dr. Zilberman, you already answered this question a little bit when you were talking about some of the pesticides, but perhaps Professor Hake, could we get your take on, is there any doubt about unexpected adverse environmental effects of GMOs?
Is there any doubt about unexpected adverse effects of GMOs?
Yeah, so a couple people have asked questions related to, we don't know what we don't know type scenario, which I know you mentioned. What is the alternative? It's ultimate war and climate change. But in regards to some of the cautiousness perhaps that might be taken, what are your thoughts on that?
Just farming practices is one thing that I see on sort of a big scale that the practice of using Roundup Ready really made it easy for farmers to grow and grow well, and so they haven't tried other methods, but I feel like that's not really a problem. They probably would have used other kinds of herbicides if they hadn't used the genetic engineering. A lot of times people talk about escape, but that's really hard to imagine these transgenes escaping into the wild, because usually those wild plants don't have the same features. And there are lots of regulations that you can't grow a transgenic, say, radish in a field of wild radishes. So that sort of possibility is always maintained in check. But personally, I don't think of it as a problem. So I can't really think of it, which is a real cop-out.
My feeling is, it may happen, no doubt, something may be, but the thing is, it's not, generally speaking, you speak about plants and there are mechanisms like that you can really eliminate it. We have much worse, like if you look at animal, like when people start using biological control, which everyone loves, and they start bringing rabbits and send them to Australia, or sending the mongoose to Hawaii. So biological control, to me, is much more.
It's a lot scarier.
It's much scarier because you take an organism that genes are basically dead matter, but mongoose you send them someplace. So to some extent, a lot of things that sound great ecologically are much more dangerous.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the fact that plants can't really manage crops on their own. They really need humans to take care of them. So is there a possibility that if you genetically engineered some wild tree and the pollen from, I mean, maybe, but we're not doing that.
See, there was a movie that was really bad for GMO about something about human tomatoes. What's it?
I don't know.
What?
The killer tomato?
Killer tomato. But I know that my kids really believe that I grow killer tomatoes.
It's like different than Jaws, though. Okay, so I know some countries will regulate a GMO depending on the process, while others base it on the product. Is there any benefit to either approach, and what are your potential thoughts on two differences?
If you get to a product by some quote natural means, it's okay, and if it took genetic engineering, it's regulated.
Yeah,
that
I believe that's the Europe.
I really think science evolves, so there will be zillions of methods. Think about it. If you're in medicine, how many? So think if you go to a dentist and you regulate every type of device, you have to. You generally at the end you regulate it by outcome. Almost all the liability rules that we have in the world are based on outcome. When you have a car accident, no one really regulates you. Okay, did you run over something or not? What type of car? What was the engine? So I think at the end it will be more on outcome, because there will be too many processes. So what really happened is that people try to kill this type of biological application from the beginning. But once it's spread and once there is a need, it will be more by outcome.
Okay. So what do each of you think? So you've spoken a lot, actually both of you, about sensible regulation. And so what does that look like for you? Some of the examples this person gave is to prevent evolution of resistance, limit acreage.
Why would you have the regulation?
Yeah, so what would your ideal regulation be? You spoke a lot about it being common sense and sensible and not corrupt.
So NIH has regulations. I was just filling out my form today, biological use authorization. And you still need to register, even if what you're doing in lab is simple E. coli things, there's some level 1 regulation. And then there's level 2 when you deal with a transgenic plant, and there's level 3 and 4 is probably doing something that is really scary, and hopefully none of you are doing that where you're working with human toxins in the laboratory. So I think having different levels And if you are changing a corn plant in a corn gene in a corn plant, that would be at a very, very low regulation where indeed it should be registered and maybe somebody has to verify it. And then the next level might be bringing a gene from another species in because maybe it is going to provide you're going to have an allergy issue, so just kind of some sort of sensible levels like that.
Okay. What scale, I guess you spoke to this a little bit, but what scale should things be ignored versus addressed?
The serious, at least in my view, is that the number one thing is to reduce redundancy. Redundancy. For example, there is no reason, for example, that every little country in Africa will have regulation of BT coal should have a regional. One of the big things in the US is that you have national regulation and rather than individual regulation. If you, for example, introduce a new variety, and if you have a BT that works in tomatoes and you introduce it an eggplant that is a related crop, you don't need to go for scratch. You don't need to go from scratch. You really need to have regulations that really provide added information. That to me is one principle. The other principle that the regulation would be based on outcome. The third type of regulation is that if you violate, if you do something that is wrong, that you should have some sort of penalty. And the third thing is that you have a random inspection. You don't really. The worst thing a lot of time with regulation is that they exist, but people don't implement them. Like for example, what happened in Auckland with the house that got burned. So a small number of regulations that they will be really, but they will be effective. The other thing is you have to recognize that when you start, that's not the time. You need to have regulation, but this is not the time to make it extremely difficult because then you will have no innovation. You like to have startups, you like to have some sort of companies. Try to minimize regulation to be safe, but later on, all the time to monitor what companies are, what's going on.
Okay, so if the GMG organisms should be regulated, but the definition of GMO/GE is inherently arbitrary, should varieties produced by breeding be equally regulated?
Honestly?
The whole magazine of Johnny seeds and like all those varieties. No. I mean, but that kind of brings up the old argument about labeling that if it's genetically engineered, it needed to be labeled, but then how about if it's sprayed with a pesticide, does it need to be labeled? And so there's all those discussions back and forth. And, so I just always find it funny where they say they're apples and they say gluten-free. It's like, oh, good grief.
But my feeling is,
So I think this question was trying to get out, what do you say to people who that come back with that
my
argument?
feeling,
Or what do you say to people who are labeling their apples gluten-free?
It's to get people to buy it because they're just kind of tricked into seeing the sign and going for it, which is also the no GMOs is another sort of marketing gimmick.
And so how do you speak with people who are?
okay, so I think the key element to understand agriculture is the big issue in agriculture today is not biology. The big issue in agriculture is people basically are in agriculture to make money. And when they make money, they try to identify an angle that will give them some edge. And historically, you have food for the poor and food for the rich. You eat organic and you feel better about yourself. You do it, so to some extent, a lot of time people basically promote something because people can feel good about it. Now, if I say that water are GMO free, it's not a lie. But some idiots, they buy a bottled water because it's GMO free. So to some extent, you really have an element that you need to educate people about science. And the biggest problem that you have is people are not educated about science. And To me, science education should start from very young age. And you don't say, oh gosh, I'm in humanities. Everyone needs to know some basic element of science, because a lot of time people take advantage of it.
Okay. Sorry, there's a lot of questions. Okay, what are the open scientific questions and puzzles in GMO production? So what kind of research still needs to be done?
Open questions. Can you do it? How fast and efficient can you do it? Can we really genetically engineer for climate change if we knew? So lately, there's a big effort to phenotype massive amounts of species and genotype them, and you have the idea of the perfect combination of alleles. And could we do that on a more quick scale, pathway, rather than one thing at a time? So it'd be interesting if you could put in a cassette of 50 CRISPR alleles to just go in and make big changes. I don't know how much you could do it, how you could screen it, but to me those are questions that I have.
But my feeling is it's a good thing about science that I don't think that we will die and we will solve all the problems. The general is that you need to understand the genome of everything. You need to understand how genetic and how genes and protein and everything are related to outcome, and then you can deal with it. And it's a work in progress, and all the time we develop new methods that are improved. I'm an economist, but 20 years from now, what we call GMO now won't exist. There will be totally different method, unless people don't allow you to do stuff like this. So to me, all the time we need to improve method and we need to improve knowledge about biology. Now, one of the things that is happening today, which I feel very bad, is if you look at our campus, you have people that are in molecular biology and people that are in organismal biology. And to some extent, in the long run, they need one another. The organismal biology can really provide the information about what are the implications, the behavioral implications of different genes, and the molecular biology develops the technology that improve it. But to me, we are really in a moment where new technology or new way is introduced and it moves forward. The regulation and the situation of society will determine how fast it is. But it's really exciting.
Yeah, and just kind of going back to thoughts I have, right now you can make a cross to teosinte and get some useful alleles from teosinte, the ancient, because they cross the parent to maize. But then to slowly bring that gene in, it takes so long. So to be able to test some things out with genetic engineering much more quickly with the knowledge we have now from the sequencing, I think could be fantastic.
Another example, I think people speak about why don't we move from annual crop to trees? Maybe you can have one day
Or perennial.
A perennial, that corn will be perennial, then you really have much.
And there are perennial corns, and people are trying to figure out what those genes are. So,
Exactly.
this is the sort of thing that genetic engineering could help move faster rather than 20, 30 years.
So so before, when you both started your education or your work or your interest in this topic, was genome sequencing even around?
No.
So how is your, not that I'm trying to imply anything, my question is geared towards, how do you look back and see just the massive changes that have, and introductions of technology? You just spoke about how it's an exciting time now. How do you think the fields moving forward will kind of improve in a similar time regime, or
I think it's kind of going like
exponentially?
It's really, we're in an exponential time. And now, in the beginning of my career, it was everybody wanted to use a Arabidopsis because it was small, you could keep the genome sequenced, and now you can work on crops, you can work on anything and make a difference. And so that really has opened up the possibilities.
So think about it. When I studied biology, it was before all the revolutions of the DNA, and it was totally different biology. Biology was, even to be honest, I remember when I came to Berkeley with a big debate, and about 40 years ago, botany would look like here compared to other sciences. And now botany is a fantastic topic. I think, I said before, we really live in an era of biological revolution. Biology compared to physics is recent. We have Mendel, and suddenly you realize that there are all these mechanisms. And to me, the thing that is amazing is that one of the highest paid professors in Berkeley is a computational genomics. And I remember I was in the biology committee, and always biologists were getting very little salary down to get very high salary.
Especially botanists, probably.
What?
Especially botanists, I bet they were.
Oh, what is really one less than English professors? You know, really low. And suddenly they're moving, which is great, you know.
So a lucky time for all you graduate students out there.
So would you say that the field is primarily being moved forward by academics or researchers in some of these large corporations? And one thing related to that, if it is moved forward in academia, do you have concerns or do you foresee issues with people pursuing like the most novel, I'm not sure how to phrase this properly. I know it's sometimes in my field there is a lot of interesting science that is not novel, right? And so it's more using some of the older techniques to gain equally valuable information, but it's no longer at the forefront of the field. So do you have any concerns about, for instance, genome sequencing? Are there crops that could be sequenced, or their genome sequenced, but you know, it's not as hot as perhaps some of the other techniques that are being developed, and so it's less interesting or receives less funding. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my gut feeling is that academics is driving it, but I think companies are doing amazing things, but they don't share the information as much, so we don't really know what they're doing. So they really rely on academics to, one, make the pool of workers for them, and to lead the way, though I'm sure amazing things are happening in companies. I mean,
I do a lot of research. Generally speaking, especially in the US, not so much. In the US, the universities are really crucial. Public research is the key. Now, public research and private research are complementary. So, for example, if you look at almost the biological revolution, the computer revolution, a lot of it started at the universities. And a lot of times the people that make discovery at the universities started companies. Like some of it started Mendel. A lot of people, if you look at Monsanto, a lot of part of Monsanto basically is about 6 or 7 startups that were added to a big company, but without it, it won't happen. If you look at now in Europe, the government pay less to support public research less. So a lot of time, European companies basically buy American companies that started by public research. Genetic is one example. Genetic is now bought by Roche, which is a Swiss company. So my feeling is that without public research, at least the US is in big trouble. Okay. And because of public research, we can be more novel. So Germany has a better car, maybe they have better cars, but we have much, we think, because we are thinking more advanced because it starts from universities. So to me, the two are really complementary. Support for public research is a big issue. Now, the one thing that I really worry, honestly, is if Trump is reelected, because now the budget is still Obama's budget. But if Trump is reelected, then it will be his budget, suddenly support for it that will go down. And that would be a disaster. Because I think that our economy is built on public research and the private sector amplified. Now, I manage research a lot of time. The job of whoever is running research in universities is to make sure that it will go to the right direction. And obviously, a lot of once in a while you have research that is fruitless. But at the end, if your research doesn't result in something good, it swings. Like in my own field, I think in economics, sometimes we go to directions that are most productive, but after a while, we shift to directions that are more valuable to society.
Okay, so we have a couple questions here regarding genetically engineered animals. So I think in general, people would like to hear your thoughts about them. For example, modified mosquitoes in Florida that can breed in an attempt to lower mosquito-borne disease prevalence. I don't know if this is something you spend any time thinking about, but
I thought it was a really amazing idea. Reading that paper where they basically engineered the mosquito to carry the tools so when it needs goes to the next generation and the next generation. It seems scary to me.
So do you foresee it being unlike genetically engineered crops where you're sending mongooses to?
Well, I'm worried about that a little bit. Yeah.
My feeling is this. One of the things that I remember when I was a kid, everyone applied DDT. And in the US and in Italy and in Europe, they eliminated mosquito. Now they cannot use DDT in Africa. The question is,
This is worse.
what? The question, so my feeling is you have to be 10 times more careful with use genetic modification in medicine. Now, when it comes to human, we do things that are 10 times more dangerous than we do with crop. But if you have this, people now speak about basically programming people against the disease. I was in a conference recently, and they spoke about the fact that 50 years from now, you won't have kids wouldn't be basically procreation wouldn't be by sex, but some sort of pre-selection. So I don't like the idea, but to some extent, these are things that, to me, that's where the issue of ethics should really be emphasized, because obviously there is a place for something like this, but what about a limit? Where do you say no? These are really the big question. So my feeling is plants, animals, and then humans.
And it's the sort of the risk benefit, so I mean, I think that has to be a long, hard thought. And if it is, so many people dying from malaria and then this risk, I mean, you have to look at it. But then just to say a ban on genetically engineered animals, I wouldn't agree with that either, because there's an example, a woman at Davis, and there are corns that don't have horns. I think it's called polled or something like that. And so they just don't like that, and they figured out the exact gene mutation. So you could genetically engineer cows that don't have that, a horn with genetic engineering, and then they wouldn't have to be dehorned, which I did once, and it's really, really brutal. So, that I think the benefit risk is worth thinking about.
I'll give you an example. But people now worry about avian flu, and they have this huge disease in China that killed 1/3 of the pigs in China. If you can find some genetic, they actually use genetic engineering for solution, it will be something that will be, at least in my view, will be okay. So my feeling is this is a tool. Every tool, traditional medicine, every medicine you have to make sure that it works well, it doesn't have side effects, etc. So to me, genetic engineering is like any other medicine. You have to make sure that it performs well and it has minimum side effects.
And are you satisfied with the way that's currently done, at least in the United States?
It can always be improved. I have 500 other problems with the medical system in the United States. Besides that, I'm unhappy about the prices, and and I'm happy about access, and happy about cost. So, but the thing, the key element is how to take scientific knowledge and deal with it. As I said before, the fact is that life expectancy is going up everywhere except the US. And that's what you have to worry about. Why? What happens there? Okay, speaking about the opioid, that's an example, but it's not something very exotic. that's something that was a problem. And it's not so much that opioids are bad by themselves, but when doctors and companies sell opioids, you need to have regulation on how you will use it.
Okay, sorry, I lost my spot here. Okay, so,
We don't have to go to 8.
yeah, we still have a lot of questions. If you're getting tired, that's okay. We still have lots of questions here.
Just don't want the audience to feel like.
Oh, this is a good one. What ways can GMOs be helpful to our society without being incorporated as food? I.e., is fast-growing wood and building materials what perceptions and opinions are around this area?
Certainly like cotton, I mean, BT cotton is almost an established thing. Or different colors, like you could have colored cotton with genetic engineering, so you don't have to use dyes, but different qualities of wood. Also, getting rid of carbon, like maybe you could engineer plants to be really, really full of lignin, so they're just like sucking up so much carbon that can't be broken up. And so you could have really heavily lignified GMO plants that then sequestered carbon for a long time. So those are just a couple thoughts.
I think that my feeling is that you need them for food, but I think actually the big challenge is how you can use them to solve climate change. I really believe that a solution to a lot of climate change will be biological. Actually, Berkeley is working with Shell Oil and BP, and we work with BP. And I look at and I speak with the chemists, and we try to see what type of strategies there are. And I wish there would be more biological strategies. All the other strategies are really expensive and dangerous. And that's what, if you can find a way that you can develop plants that can sequester carbon.
A colleague of mine, Ed Buckler from Cornell, had this idea, since we're all set to grow so much massive amounts of corn, let's just get corn to become this solid rock of lignin, and then bury it, So corn farmers could just keep making the corn, they keep doing the corn, but then we just bury that carbon and get rid of it. So I don't think that's going to happen, but I think there might be something creative there.
Is there a lot of movement in the field to pursue specific biological carbon sequestration? I know there's a lot of, let's put it on the coast of Norway.
20 years, 15 years ago, there was tons of money into it. But it's a big topic.
Okay.
See, like I think, for example, that maybe that you can use it, sequester, you can, for example, you may use it in aquaculture. One of the fastest growing food products now is aquaculture. And you can use
Aquaculture?
Yes.
I can't hear you.
Aquaculture is huge, and if you can use the genetic manipulation to develop faster growing algae and animal feed and food for feed, that can be really great. And develop like in Africa, food and fish are very. So I was very upset about the salmon. You know the story about the salmon. There is a GM salmon.
And it was a growth hormone, right?
It was a growth hormone. Now, the thing about it is the biggest thing in terms of animal food in the last, 70 years is poultry. Dead chicken is much more efficient than beef in terms of conversion of animals. And the reason that we eat so much chicken that through whatever breeding, we have chicken that grow very fast. In 4 months, it's ready to eat. So they develop a salmon that in 1 year is ready to eat. Now, why it's important? Because you can take the salmon and you can put it in a pond and you can grow it. And in developing countries, a lot of time, if you're Indian, you don't have access to food. And moving food from one end to another is a problem of freshness. So not allowing this type of product to be developed, to me, has a lot of negative implications.
All right. So I'm going to ask 2 more questions to kind of wrap it up, and then if anyone wants to ask a direct question, the room is small enough for that to So what are you most excited about in the future of GMOs? You talked about a lot of different things, so this might be redundant to some of what you've already talked about tonight, but can each of you give us one thing that's the most exciting?
For me personally, I would have been, except I think I'm going to retire before I can do it, but I would have loved the idea of being able to do, make a transgenic corn plant by myself in my laboratory. Right now, it's still really hard to do it, and we pay somebody a lot of money to do it. So I love the idea of being able to just do it in my laboratory and maybe to be able to do transgenics for research easily and quickly. And as an experiment. Right now, it's mostly a pipe dream. So that's me personally, but I love the idea of, I was really excited by biofuels because I thought, oh, corn plants, we are plant biologists, we can save the world. And then I realized that was not true. And it would be better to have fuel efficient cars than biofuels. So that broke my heart. But I love the idea that plants could be helpful in climate change and resiliency. So that's my answer.
I actually think that I studied biofuel early, but I really think that I'm excited about the role of plants in climate change in terms of sequestration, in terms of fuels, in terms and the one concrete thing is I think artificial. All this animal-free meat will be used, and these are two things very different.
Okay. And finally, from Kathy, what's the most important question about GMOs that hasn't come up tonight?
I mean, it's been kind of woven in our answers, but it didn't come up, is why are people against it? So I think that we've tried to say why they shouldn't be against it, but nobody asked that question. Why is it, why are there so many people who are afraid of it?
How do you interact with people? You say you have people in your hometown who are like, you're the corn lady.
I try to just explain what it is if they're willing to listen for a little bit.
Okay. Do you find that it works? Do you
Yeah,
find
it does to a certain extent. But they have to trust you. And so if you come at them and say, well, I'm a professor at Berkeley and I know a whole lot more than you do, so let me tell you why you're just being an idiot, so that doesn't work so well. So they have to like you to start with and feel that you're coming from a place that's comfortable. And then you can have that conversation.
I think to me the issue of why people that is a political economy. I think people don't realize how important that the things in the world are not done only by economics, they're done by politics, and politics and economics interact. And the more I know about GMO, the more I know that things are not as simple as they are. And some of the, if you write a book about GMO, I write blogs, so once in a while I tell the interesting stories. Well, no, the interesting stories are how the evolution of GMO was based by politics and by the little trickery, and basically everyone wants to say, oh, there is consumer resistance. The reality is that there is a manipulation of consumers from both sides. So understanding the political economy is sometimes that it's a little bit complex, but it's really important because it really explains a lot.
So just to follow up with that, many of us in the audience here are graduate students and are, more and more becoming introduced to the world where, we interact with people who don't think like us and don't have a strong science background. So how have you been able to practice like your own resiliency in dealing with the politics, even when you know it's wrong, over the course of your career and not becoming discouraged? Or have you become discouraged?
As far as GMOs go, Berkeley's probably the worst place, or has been. There's a lot of sort of anti-GMO feeling here compared to Iowa and Illinois, those red states. I mean, everybody's got GMO fields and everybody seems to be doing okay. So there isn't that gut feeling. And so it really is depending upon where you are and who you're talking to. But I've always sort of enjoyed it, the discussions. Personally.
Yeah, you know, I was working, part being an economist, you're involved in debates.
Mhm.
So I was involved in a lot of the debate in water in California. And it's amazing. I think there's much more, actually much more, and in pesticide. So every time that you have a new topic, there are a lot of debate, and you really have to be able to present your perspective and to be speak with other people. The thing that I feel very good that we have something called the environmental leadership program, and every year we have a debate about GMO. We bring people like Miguel Altieri is really anti-GMO, and we speak with them, and we know that we will disagree. But I think that all together, I think now we are at least we are in a much better shape than we were several years ago.
Yeah, you mean the water debate, like should it go to farmers or should it go to fish? Is that kind of the water debate?
Oh, the big water debate was about water trading.
Water trading.
Yes. Why should water go to agriculture? Water pricing,
Lots of.
canal, like there is a canal. Think about it. People wanted to build, and I was against it, to move water from the Eel River to the Central Valley. And then you really see a lot of interest go. So the water wars in California will really be that. If you see the movie Chinatown, you can realize. So you have to recognize that part of why we're at the university.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions they would, sorry if I didn't get to your question, but anyone have any direct questions they want to ask before we wrap up?
So I submitted this question in the forum, but I'm really curious. You're talking a lot about conventional and GMO crops, and a little bit about organic, but not really about what niche they might fill, like if there is a need for organic crops, and if so, why?
I mean,
Repeat the question.
so he's
Yeah.
wondering about a niche for organic crops. And, you know, I feel like what people really like is local food because then it's not getting shipped all over the country. And that's helping reduce costs to the climate. And so on our organic farm, it's we say it's local. I mean, it's also organic, but the chickens get GMO food because it's cheaper. So I think there's a niche, and I think it's local food. Because why spray pesticides on or spray stuff on your field? All politics is local, all plants are local.
From an economic, if you look at salmon in California, the big issue in agriculture is not GMO, and the big issue is income. And for a lot of farmers, organic is a product, it's a luxury item. People have horses even though they can
Our
buy.
produce is the same price as Safeway or cheaper, just to let you know.
But you sell it directly.
We sell it directly.
Oh, but if you sell, but if
If we
you,
sold to a middleman, then it would get higher.
it's a bit higher. And also the other thing is California is an ideal place to grow organic. California, so the thing is organic is a niche, but you cannot say to someone in Mexico they are idiots because they don't go organic, or somewhere in Illinois. Not every place you can go organic.
And a horrible thing I witnessed in Nebraska, where they were plowing up the prairie, the sand hills, so they could grow organic corn, and it was the soil had enough nutrients for 1 year. And so they would were destroying the prairie to get a 1 year crop of organics. And so something like that, I feel like, is just so against the idea of what should be organic. It should be sustainable and long term. So there is a niche, and it's not corn in Nebraska.
There's a question back there.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could speak to your ideas about like community self-determination, especially in what you call developing countries, which I think is like a very Western way to put it, but like for communities that have been practicing like traditional ecological practices and who save seeds, and carry like ancestral ways of doing things. How do you like engage with communities as people who aren't from those native lands and like honor those practices in a respectful way when you like are coming in already with like your own concepts about like the future of growing food?
If you could just repeat that.
Yeah, so essentially, if you think about cultures that have very, you said ancestral ways of doing things, and growing their own food in sustainable ecosystems, how do you approach a conversation with
Like, how do you elevate community determination so communities make decisions about how they steward their own lands?
I don't know, I've been working in developing countries. It's a real challenge. In some cases, you don't interfere. In most cases, what I found is that a lot of time, if you go to developing countries now, things are changing compared to what they were 30 years ago. In Africa, I go to the jungle in Ivory Coast, or I didn't go to Congo, that's too dangerous. And people have bicycles and cell phone, and they don't, and they go to the city. So there is a lot of transition. So it's really tricky. There is much more pull from there than push from Monsanto doesn't go to this area, but this countries, a lot of people want to move to something. What cities, what happened in rural areas in many cases, the things are breaking because they have the temptation of the modern world. So it's not that you I haven't encountered, but gosh, I'm not an expert.
So you're saying that the companies don't impose on people?
They're not interested.
They're not interested. The thing is this, the big challenge, if you work at this place, is you beg the companies to come there. That's the thing. If you don't have the companies, what do you, then the government. It's not that the companies are really cannot make money. The companies, they basically they would go to the US or China or part of India that are more modern. If you go to Rwanda, okay, Rwanda basically seduced company to come there, And now, so of course, there are a lot of bad things. Like a lot of time, you have deforestation, and the companies are not instead of protecting the forest, companies would destroy the forest, but they would close their eyes. That for sure too.
You know what?
They would close their eyes. So if you, for example, buy beans from some African countries, it may be a result of deforestation, but deforestation will happen anywhere. Like I would really love that there will be a lot of research to triple the productivity of cocoa and to reduce the acreage of cocoa by 1/2, and then you can save the tropical forest. Today, what really happened in Africa is that the company said, oh, we don't really want to buy, and today the companies try to avoid buying cocoa that is from deforestation, so people will deforest and find 500 tricky ways to enter the supply chain. So it's really complex. I wish it would be so simple. Like there are certain things that you have to do. If you, for example, develop a variety that's based on, develop a product that's based on a traditional variety, you should pay the tribe a certain amount of royalties. Or a lot of time you need to develop mechanisms to allow traditional life. But people are really gravitated towards modernity because it basically is associated with easier life and longer life expectancy. So it's really tricky. I wish it was simple, but
It just seems complicated to like speak for every.
of course, I agree with you. It's really
By saying that they all want to modernize, I don't think that's true.
I know that's.
We should hold space for those communities that
And I agree with you.
Daniel, did you have a question?
I'll take us right up to the 8 o'clock. If you had your druthers and you could take the best practices from organic agriculture practices and from like whatever the crazy industrial ag that we have now, what would you mash together if there was a market for it? Because now these markets are bifurcated and organic carries the premium, but if you push them together, you lose that premium. But you may also gain practices from that that might benefit, like.
It seems like you have 3 streams, where you really have traditional organic with genetic modifications, but still you're not, so that wouldn't be Roundup ready, it would be more BT type thing. So if you can spray organic fields with BT, why can't you genetic engineer it in? I mean, to me, that seems like that would be a good example. And I'm not sure about how disruptive of the markets. Like there was a clear presentation that I'm sure you were part of where some farmer from the Central Valley, he had 3 different types. He had 3 streams and he had his markets and his niches. So I don't see that's a problem. And certainly on our farm, and sorry, I keep going back to it, but we've gotten more and more better at not tilling the soil as many times with better practices. So I think there's ways that you could get away from tilling all the time, which is a real problem.
I really think that we are changing so much. 20 years from now, we'll have artificial meat, we'll have vertical farming will be huge because people really like to have
I have a hard time with that stuff, but
No.
I'll see.
No, I'll give you an example. One of the things that a graduate of Berkeley did was he developed the idea of lettuce and plastic, basically. All the pre-cut lettuce that is in plastic. So lettuce was a $1 billion industry, now it's a $20 billion industry. And suddenly lettuce become much more important. People now eat hamburger and lettuce. So there are a lot of other things that are really, really I think that with more genetic GMOs, there will be much less use for pesticides. So I feel that some sort of organic with biotech can be very, very powerful. I think that on the other hand, I think if you're an organic grower, a lot of time the contradiction is really good in terms of having differentiated products. You can really gain more access to them, you can make more money. So it's not only that you optimize from society, these are businesses. And if you have 10% organic and 90% conventional and you make twice as much as the organic because you're in California, why don't you do it? So I think you really, it's quite a complex situation and the technology is changing.
okay. Oops.
Go ahead.
Okay. So a lot of people in this room are involved in political advocacy and have relationships with legislators both here in the state and then kind of in the federal government. I wonder if you could identify any specific policy points or specific things that we can do as political advocates to push the direction into a situation that's more amenable to the use of GMOs in agriculture.
No, the policy not
I just think first, all these elements to increase payment for ecosystem services in agriculture. To make sure that there are support practices that are environmentally sound. It's not only GM, basically dealing with soil erosion, water management, dealing with nitrate. This is a very important area. Like we really have a terrible problem in nitrate in California that was a neglect for 40 years. And these are the issues that a lot of time. I personally think that increasing intensity and productivity is really good because it would allow you to reduce the footprint of agriculture. If you ask me today, I don't care organic, non-organic, I care you really need to reduce the footprint of agriculture. And the other thing is usually one thing to advocate is sound policies with respect to climate change. That is really, really important, I think. And in terms of GMO, sound regulation, and basically that's what we try, both of us, to speak
Thank you to our panelists, and just a reminder, the roundtable, if you're interested in having a less formal discussion and thinking about how you can actually advocate regarding this topic, 5:30 next Thursday in Lacombe Hall, 375, and I'm sure you'll receive an email about it. All right.